It's like many of these towns, it's really not on most people's radar today, but in the 1930s, Renovo was a very important town because it was known as a railroad repair car shop for the Pennsylvania Railroad. So it played a really major role actually for the first half of the 20th century, but certainly by 1943, which is when Harold Lehman, the artist, showed up in Renovo, the Renovo shops were becoming very important once again for the war effort. And what's interesting about this particular mural is that it was probably one of the last commissioned in the entire country. About 2 months after this particular mural goes up in Renovo, the program is shut down. But it's interesting because it shows the arc of this particular program. It started during the Great Depression and sort of wound up by the 1940s and as the nation was going to war. So Harold Lehman decided, rather than doing a history-themed mural, which was what he had originally proposed, he wanted to show something that showed Renovo's contribution to the war effort. So if you look here, you'll see what he depicted were a group of workers manhandling a rail car wheel, and off to the left, this kind of helps to date it. And that's what's wonderful about these murals. There's always little details that kind of help you to place it in time and space. There's a gentleman holding a poster, and if you look closely, it says production. That was a famous wartime production poster that he included in here. Now, there's a great little story behind this particular mural. In addition to depicting the Renovo railroad shops, the repair car shops, you'll notice that an interesting detail on the caps of the workers, the little buttons, and those would have been immediately recognized in the 1940s as Union buttons, which to me, when I first saw that, immediately raised a question. The Treasury Department doesn't allow these kinds of things, or certainly didn't allow this kind of thing. Depictions of, you don't see nudity, you don't see political sentiments unless you're dealing with an ingenious artist, you don't see a hammer and sickle. But in this case, the artist managed to slip in these Union buttons on hats of these railroad car workers. Now, what's interesting, the way we sort of were able to make sense of this is we went back to the archival record. The archival record being maintained by the daughter of Harold Lehman. And if you can walk over to this case and get a chance to look into this case, what we were able to do based on the materials that his daughter had maintained is sort of reconstruct the commission. When Harold Lehman got to town, he submitted sketches which he had sent into the Treasury Department. He submitted a color study, which we show here, it's not a color study, it's actually black and white, but it was a study that he sent in for approval. The Treasury Department promptly rejected it as too stylized. They wanted the artist to work in a more realistic tradition. But in the course of working on this commission, Harold Lehman met up with this fellow named R.C. Russell. There's a photograph of him. R.C. Russell was the foreman of the Renovo shops. He was management. He was the model for the foreman shown with a production poster. So Harold Lehman strikes up an acquaintance with this fellow, and he tells him what he wants to do. And R.C. Russell says, I think it's a great idea. That's the state of affairs here in Renovo. We are now a union town. So R.C. Russell sends Harold Lehman a letter once he goes back to New York that with a set of Union buttons. He said, use this as your model. In fact, if you look in here, he actually includes in the letter a quick sketch to give Lehman an idea of where he should put these Union buttons on the hats of the workers. So Lehman has all the materials he needs to sort of create what he thinks is an historically, or actually socially accurate picture of the shop floor in Renovo. He has one final move, which is he has to submit his final color study to the Treasury Department, which we include in the lower right-hand portion of the case. And if you look at the color study, it's very interesting because he shows what you see here, with the exception of the fact that the buttons, which he depicts in the painting, are just flecks of paint. So the Treasury Department had absolutely no idea what these were, and they literally escaped notice of the Treasury Department. So we wind up with a very interesting mural that is sort of one of its kind, a Union mural, which is sort of the exception, again, to what had been the Treasury Department's very, very conservative approach to the subject matter.